Well, next up, a specialty pharmaceutical company focused on developing, commercializing late-stage hospital-focused pharmaceuticals, according to their website, addressing areas of unmet medical need. Tim Watts has 25 years' experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors, qualified chartered accountant, again, initially with ICI and Zeneca, financial controller at AstraZeneca, and then with other companies, Archimedes Pharma and Oxford Biomedica, and has advised numerous startups.
Sorry to say that if I survive into January, I've actually done 30 years in the industry.
30 years, okay.
But anyway, now I'm with Shield and have been the CFO there for just over the last year. So Shield is AIM listed. It's got a market cap now of about £220 million, and the primary focus is on commercializing a product for the treatment of iron deficiency, which is called Ferrocru in Europe, Acrifer in the US, where we've only recently been approved. It's a novel oral treatment for iron deficiency. We've had 3 successful phase 3 clinical studies, 2 of which formed the basis of the US approval, one of which was a head-to-head study against one of the industry-leading products. We've out-licensed the product Ferrocru in Europe to Norgine, who are a privately held, mid-sized company with a very strong sales and marketing presence. As I said, we've only very recently got the approval for Acrifer, as the drug is known in the US, in July, and we're looking now to appoint a sales and marketing partner in the US. We do have in our portfolio a late-stage asset, a phosphate binder. That requires one more phase 3 study. I don't think there's really anything included in our valuation today for that product. We're semi-virtual in as much as there's only 20 or so of us working in the company at the moment, although we like to think we're pretty experienced. And we have a cash runway that goes to the third quarter of 2020, although if and when we are successful in appointing a partner for the US, we would expect quite a sizable upfront payment for that license, which would be the industry norm. And so this cash flow forecast here does not include any upfront. This, I guess, is what the investment thesis is. We would argue, I'm not the CEO, I'm the CFO, but I too would argue that the company is undervalued. Current market cap, as I say, is around 220 million. The 4 analysts who cover us, Edison, Peel Hunt, Hardman, and FinCap, variety of forecasts there. But I've taken the liberty of picking some quotes out of the recent reports. They've all put out notes basically on the back of our interim results in early August. And certainly the first 3 all say significant upside potential, and we will look at this again when the company has got a partner in the US. FinCap have taken a slightly more bullish stance from the outset. There is a slight correction I need to make here. The Feb 16 IPO price, £1.50 was the IPO price, which is why it slipped onto that line, but there was about 116 million shares, so actually the valuation at IPO was more like 175 million, so it should be a little bit further up. So a little bit about iron deficiency and where Ferrocru Acrifer fits into that. Iron deficiency is required for multiple functions in the body. It's a key component of hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen around the body, but it has many other aspects, many other functions as well. Iron deficiency fundamentally occurs either if your body doesn't absorb enough iron from your diet, or you lose iron through blood loss. And that can be exacerbated in a number of chronic diseases, in particular inflammatory bowel disease, chronic kidney disease, women's health issues, and CHF. But there are many others as well. It's the most common form of anemia, and that's called iron deficiency anemia, or you'll see it referred to as IDA. And the treatment of iron deficiency with or without anemia is with either oral or intravenous iron replacement therapy. Typically what will happen is if you're suffering from iron deficiency anemia, typically very few people with just the iron deficiency will be treated. But if you're suffering from anemia, your first line treatment is almost certainly going to be with a cheap generic salt-based product. These are inexpensive and convenient, but they are very poorly absorbed and therefore they restore iron levels slowly, and because these are iron salts, and because the iron and the salt break out to free up the iron for absorption, the iron can aggregate in the gut and create a variety of unpleasant side effects, and therefore they're not well tolerated. So for patients for whom there's a really pressing need to treat the anemia or other aspect of the iron deficiency, the only other course of treatment is through intravenous, which is where you essentially have a very substantial dose of iron injected into your bloodstream. That actually can cause anaphylactic shock, so you have to have it done in a clinic or a hospital environment, so it's inconvenient. The drug price component of that is expensive, and of course the hospital cost, whoever has to pay those, is an expense as well. So essentially iron therapy is poorly served. Our product is a novel oral formulation. It is not a salt. Essentially it is a chelated product. Is there a pointer here, the red dot? Yeah, there. So you've got the Fe3 plus iron surrounded by 3 maltol molecules, and that forms a very strong chelate. And essentially, unlike a salt, it does not break down in the body until it reaches the part of your body where the absorption of iron takes place. That process in the body is stronger than the chelation, and it will pull out of the body will pull out of the chelate as much iron as it needs. Because essentially the molecules around these are maltol molecules around here. Maltol is a product, essentially a sugar-type substance used quite a lot in the food industry. So it's harmless, and so this chelate, if it's not absorbed, if the body doesn't absorb all of it, the chelate will just pass straight through the body and has no side effects. And to the extent that the iron is taken into the body, the maltol molecules are separated out, and they too will pass through the body in the normal way. So essentially you've got a product here where when it reaches the part of the body which, if you are short of iron, if you are iron deficient, the body will demand the iron. It will take the iron from this product and not cause the side effects that you see with the iron salts. Where do we position this product in the treatment process? Really, as I said a few minutes ago, essentially patients who are diagnosed with iron deficiency will first of all be treated with oral iron. Some of these patients will be tolerant of the oral salts, and because these are generic products, they're cheap. That's probably an adequate way of treating those patients if they can handle them. But the statistics will vary from indication to indication. But in some indications, up to 70% of patients find they cannot tolerate the salts. So they then come down this path. And as I said a little bit earlier, at the moment, or up until now, the only treatment for them is to come down this intravenous route, which has its cost, it has its unpleasant, it's inconvenient, and also having a lot of iron injected into your bloodstream is not particularly pleasant. In fact, I saw an article from Australia just today which said that it was asking all GPs in Australia to get patient consent before doing intravenous iron therapy, because the actual injection area is now causing brown stains which don't come out around where the intravenous takes place. So it is not particularly pleasant. So if you have to, a patient will come down this route. But if you can't at the moment, patients simply will say, well, I'll tolerate the side effect, tolerate the effects of the iron deficiency, and I won't have any treatment. And what we're saying is, well, now you don't have to be in that position. You can come down the Ferrocru-Actifa route because it's oral, it's easy to take, and it doesn't have the side effects. I'll also say, because I'm not going to say it's not on any of the other slides, we have patent protection on this product out to 2035, so we've got a long 15-year life, which is quite unusual for a product just coming to the market. In terms of the market size, the volume and value, the top half of the slide essentially repeats information I've just said, but because oral is prescribed first, the actual volume and number of prescriptions is far greater for oral than it is for intravenous. It represents probably about 90% of the market by prescription, whereas our IV is only about 10%. But what you see by value is that the iron the intravenous size is at least 50% of the market. This slide actually was one that we did some time ago. This is 23 to 2016. In a minute, you'll see on a slide. Here it suggests that the intravenous value is about $1 billion. We've got evidence in a minute which suggests it's approaching $2 billion now. So this is a big market. And where is my evidence for saying that? This is a chart that we actually took from Vifor, as you can see down here. Vifor are a Swiss company, and they own Ferinject, which is the leading intravenous product. This comes out of a presentation they gave when their last annual results, and they're basically saying that 898 million Swiss francs, so broadly equivalent to US dollars, are their sales of their intravenous product, Ferinject. And they're saying here that they reckon they've got 49% of the market. So $900 million, double it, you've got a market there of $1.8 billion, which we would say can now be directly targeted by our product, Ferrocru and Acrifa. And I mentioned a little bit earlier that we had a clinical study which went head-to-head, so H-to-H, against Ferinject. What that study showed when it reported in March of this year was that Ferrocru was non-inferior to Ferinject in treating iron deficiency anemia. So that means we can say to physicians, you don't have to give your patients intravenous iron. You can treat them with this oral product instead. And this is another slide from Vifor, where essentially, it doesn't look like it's, no, the pink lines I'm afraid aren't showing up. These are recent growth rates in these countries. So you can see that the intravenous market and the Ferinject sales in particular are growing rapidly in these countries. So this is a high growth and a high value market that we can get into. Recent clinical development activities. I said that we had 3 clinical studies. I'm not going to sort of go through each of those and the results because they've been out for some time. This is a slide actually we showed at our interims presentation. So the head-to-head study reported in March of 2019, and as I said a minute ago, that essentially showed that the response rate from Ferrocru was non-inferior, which is a sort of technical industry term, when compared with Ferinject, which is the market-leading intravenous product. We would love to be able to show you a little bit more information on this, and we will do in due course, but until the data is presented in a peer-reviewed form in an abstract at a clinical congress, which it's going to be in October, we are not in a position to give much more detail on this because essentially the industry and the science and the medics will say, look, if you've already published your data, then we're not interested in publishing it in a scientific congress. So we haven't published the full data of this yet, but the full clinical study report, which is a confidential document, is being used by our partners Norgine to develop the whole pricing and reimbursement argument for the European market, and essentially to say this product is as good as the intravenous, and therefore we should be pricing the product equivalently. We have a pediatric program which is required both under the terms of our approval from both the European authorities, the EMA, and the US FDA. I won't dwell on that for now. And some publications, as I mentioned, the head-to-head study publication is coming out next month. We had some interesting other less important publications, but still helpful. So what has been going on in Europe in terms of the commercialization of the product? We licensed the product last year to Norgine. I think you've all got copies of the presentation, so I won't go through the terms of the license deal. But how are things getting on? Clearly, there was a handover period that we had to go through first, which really meant that Norgine really got going and launched the product at the start of this year. You need to bear in mind in Europe that there are 2 markets essentially where you can go in and set your price, and that's the UK and Germany. The rest of the continent, particularly the other big markets, France, Spain, Italy, they require you to go and negotiate with them for a price and that price to be reimbursed. We have not wanted to do that until we had the definitive evidence from the head-to-head study because it's that head-to-head study which gives us the justification for seeking a high price. So the product has been launched in Germany and the UK, where, as I said, we can set the price. And again, there's some subtleties. In Germany, you can get going pretty much straight away. But in England, you have to go on a case-by-case basis around all the care commissioning groups that there are. So there's about 200 of those. And Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland all have their own bodies, and as yet none of them have yet approved. So it's a painful process in the UK where you have to sort of chip away and get the drug going. So we don't expect, and Norgine don't expect, a rocket-like takeoff of Ferrocru. What you can see, though, is this is a chart which shows the UK and German pack sales. We showed this in our half-year results. Shield had actually launched the product back in the fourth quarter of 2016, but was very cash constrained. But there was some steady growth in the packs. For a variety of reasons, Shield then ran out of cash and had to withdraw all cash resources. But very encouragingly, the product did not collapse at that time. It kept growing, albeit on a much slower basis. And then when Norgine started to get going in the first half of this year, the sales have started to rise quite quickly. We deliberately haven't put a white, we don't want to actually show the Norgine's confidential information about how many packs they're selling. But that is obviously an encouraging takeoff. But as I say, we have to bear in mind that so far it is only in the UK and Germany. Or in fact, it's only in England and Germany. France, Italy, Spain, and other countries in Europe, the pricing and reimbursement packages will go in based on the head-to-head study data, and that work is going on at the moment. But these countries all take time, and it is likely that it'll be into the first quarter of 2021 before we can get the product going in all of the countries in Europe. In terms of the US, we got the approval a couple of months ago for iron deficiency in adults. That's a great result because it's a very broad, it's not just iron deficiency anemia, it's the whole iron deficiency. There are some post-approval commitments, but we're building those into the existing pediatric study that has already been planned for the European authorities. And this is a major market opportunity. If you just look at iron deficiency anemia in the States, not the broader iron deficiency, we reckon there's something like 8 to 9 million. In fact, I think I've got a slide in a minute which shows about 9.5 million US patients. Inevitably, however you measure these things, you can look at it in different ways, so you get slightly different numbers. But it's of that order of magnitude who have iron deficiency anemia. The current US market, we reckon, is worth about $1 billion. So that was going back to that V4 slide of nearly $2 billion. And we think there's potentially 2 to 3 times more patients who have iron deficiency without the anemia. And in many ways, you can say if you get to the iron deficiency anemia stage, you're actually a failure that's a treatment failure for people with iron deficiency. Why let it go on and on and on until you get to the anemic stage? So we're going to be positioning as a non-inferior oral alternative to intravenous iron, but in due course, we would see if the success that we would expect to have with Acrifa, it will then sort of start to be used in the broader replacement for the existing oral iron salts. And we anticipate that the pricing, if you were to take Acrifa for a year, and it's twice daily, it's basically a capsule you take twice daily. If you were to take it to about a year, we want to price that, and we think our US partner will probably want to price that around the cost of a single dose of intravenous iron. So a pricing argument will say, if you take this for a year, you solve the iron deficiency problem. If you take intravenous iron, you need typically to come back every 3 to 4 months because you just dump a load of iron into somebody's veins, and if they've got a problem, they can't absorb or they're bleeding, then over time that iron will come out of the body again. So you need to top it up. So we think there's a significant price and health economics argument. This is the chart which shows the 9 or so million patients with iron deficiency anemia in the US and by the types of disease that they would be suffering. In terms of the process, we're not going to say any more than we said at when we put out our interims at the beginning of August. We are running a process to select a partner at the moment, and we envisage that we can complete that process by the end of this year, although we're not going to do that at any price. We want to get the best deal rather than say we'll have to do a deal by the end of the year. But we think we can get it done by the end of the year. We do, as I say, have a backup product, PT20. I think in the interest of, I'm probably running a bit short of time, so I'll just skip over this for now. Financial headlines, we had revenues of 2.6 million for the first half of the year. 2.2 of that was a milestone that we got from Norgine, which was written into the agreement. On the back of a successful head-to-head study, they would give us a 2.5 million euro, 2.2 million pounds milestone. The royalties and that we get from them at the moment is still small beer in comparison. Our losses have come right down because we've had to restructure the organisation a year ago. We had 6.6 million of cash at the end of June, and in fact, I'll move on to the next slide. The cash runway, as I think I said earlier on, extends into the third quarter of next year. So on the assumption that we can get a deal done this year or early next year at most, then I don't believe that we have a cash issue, because we have plenty of cash to get us through to the middle of next year. In terms of news flow, the potential out-licensing agreement in the US. We're also working in the same time on an out-licensing arrangement in China. Again, we're going through a similar process. We have a short list of candidates. We're going to start the paediatric study sometime in the first half of next year, and there will be a further update of European sales. But the key issues are clearly going to be the US first, and then the China deals. So, as a summary, we've seen encouraging sales growth from Norgine's first 6 months, but only in Germany and England. Great news that Acrifor was approved in the US. The out-licensing processes are well underway. We've got a fantastically broad label, which really means there's a huge market for Ferrocru or Acrifor to go for.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So, questions for Tim. Let me ask you one while they're thinking about that. In terms of your potential earnings, how price sensitive is this? Because obviously you've talked about the complexities of setting the price. If you were to set it a lot lower or a lot higher, what are the advantages, disadvantages of that?
The problem in the pharmaceutical industry generally is that once you've set a price, you can never increase it. Now, that's not quite true in the US, but even the US is getting tougher, and there are a lot of pricing scandals, as you're probably aware. So it's not advisable to shoot low for a price, really, because you can always reduce the price at some later stage if that's what you want to do. Also, for our product, although we see that this could be a product which in time could be used in the GP fraternity, primary care fraternity, because our clinical studies where the evidence lies has mainly been in inflammatory bowel disease and in chronic kidney disease, we would expect that, and this is what Norgine are doing, and we would certainly expect in the US, that any partner we choose will seek to go and use that data with those specialists who treat those first to really establish the credibility. And for them, what we can say is, look, if you treat your patients with Acrifor, it is going to be cheaper than treating them with the intravenous therapy. And that will be the argument. So pushing the price down much lower at that early stage is just going to lose revenue. Once we've got acceptance in the specialist community, and then hopefully that broadens out into cardiology and women's health, then one would expect that the sort of noise will start to generate momentum in the wider primary care community. And of course, in the US, you're allowed to do direct-to-consumer advertising as well, which you can imagine this would be quite a nice sort of DTC type of campaign that you could run, but not immediately. But in those later years, when you're going out into the broader community, maybe at that stage you might want to bring the price down to get the volumes.
Okay. Right, there's one.
I've got it, I'll be quick.
Yep. Okay.
Congrats on hitting the NI margin, which I think was 20%. Are you able to say what the delta...
Sorry, the which margin?
Your non-inferiority margin.
Oh, right, yes.
Are you able to tell us what the delta was?
I won't, and I'm not sure. Firstly, I'm not sure that I'm technically qualified to answer that question. Secondly, it's going to wait, I think, until the publication in the middle of October.
Okay, and at the front here?
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that the size of the global market is 2 billion. Is it global, or is it just US and Europe, that number?
So first of all, that 2 billion I showed you, I think was old date. You know, it was a 2013 to 2016 chart. V4 are saying that it's 1.8 billion, and I think that was, for them, that was an attempt at global. But of course, once you get outside the US, Europe, and Japan, the markets become much, much smaller. Now, China, I think, will become very big, but it's not there yet.
Do you mean Chinese are prone to iron deficiency more than?
Again, I'm not qualified to say whether they're any more or less prone to us, but we will need, our Chinese partner, whoever we select, will in fact need to do one more study, because the Chinese authorities require that you have studies with enough ethnically Chinese patients in the database before they approve it. And our studies, we don't have enough, so any partner will need to do that study. But I don't know whether they're more or less inclined to iron deficiency than we are. I suspect there's little difference. But,
And if your business plan progresses as you believe it may with the success in the US, and you're able to sell your product successfully in Europe, in the US, maybe China and Japan, what market share do you envisage your company to have, let's say in 5 years' time, 3 to 5 years' time?
what market?
Market share. Let's say the market will be 3 billion in 5 years. Let's just put a number out.
I think it's entirely reasonable to think that this product could get 10% of the market. You could argue it could have significantly more than that. I mean, everything I've seen, and I'm not an expert, but everything I've seen suggests that this product has some very interesting advantages over both the existing oral and the existing intravenous. And therefore, you know, if that's right, why wouldn't it take more than 10%? But I think it would be unwise to suggest that within 5 years it could grab more than 10% of that market. It's got to be absolutely, you know, spectacularly stellar to do better than that, I think. But then 10% of that sort of market is obviously, you know, quite a generous size.
Yeah, I was quite surprised with the slide you showed. The Swiss company went from 18 million to 900 in 10 years. What was the reason for their success? And could you be that company in 10 years' time, having $1 billion of sales?
Well, we won't have the sales because we're outsourcing the commercialization. So ours would be a royalty flow, because we will do a license deal, which typically would have an upfront payment when the license deal is done. It might or might not have sales milestones when you first hit 200 million or first hit 500 million or whatever it is. But a crucial part to it would be a royalty flow. So we won't be the company with that level of sales, but we won't have the cost base either. So why did V4 grow the intravenous? I think they came out with a better intravenous product than anybody else. And there is clearly a need. I mean, if you're suffering badly from inflammatory bowel disease and you're anemic and you can't take the oral salts, you need something.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.